guess. Mike, you know.
There's an expression that if everyone's family, no one is. There's a corollary to the federal government. If everything is federal, then nothing is. When we're so busy funding the reconstruction of a random staircase in some city or paying the bus fares for residents of another city, we're doing all sorts of things the federal government was never intended to be, do, or fund. All of a sudden we find that the few things that the federal government is in charge of doing exclusively can't reasonably be accomplished because we're so spread out doing so many things. I want to make very clear, clear up a misconception that has been widely disseminated. The humanitarian and rule of law crisis unfolding along our southern border, and it truly is an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, is not there because of a lack of adequate federal legislation. Now, sure, our immigration code is a mess. A lot of it was developed over a long period of time through the Buddy Holly era and a little bit since then. And some things need to be tightened, no question about that. But President Biden has every authority that he would need. He has plenty of authority today to secure the border. The reason this is happening is not for want of adequate federal legislation. It's for a lack of will to enforce that legislation, or better said, a willful desire to not enforce that legislation. Let's just look at a couple of things. First of all, asylum. A lot of this started through the asylum process, when these uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration commenced on or about January 20, 2021, the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated President of the United States. A lot of those were processed through the asylum process. They were said to be asylum applicants. It's important to remember that there is no cognizable, unconditional right to asylum under federal law. It is rather a discretionary grant of authority to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who may grant asylum to those who qualify under the standards that we have under federal law. There are corresponding requirements that anticipate that when we have more asylum applicants than we have, there's no obligation to just say, okay, well, you're here, so we're going to write down your name on a piece of paper and send you off into the interior of the United States after buying you a plane ticket, allowing you to board said plane without identification, without a passport, a driver's license, or anything else telling us who you are. And we'll give you a little slip of paper that says one day you'll be called up for an immigration hearing. Can't tell you when that will happen, but it may be a decade or more, maybe 12 years, for that matter, before you get it. In the meantime, have fun. And by the way, within short order, you'll receive a work permit. There's nothing in federal law that says that that is the answer. In fact, federal law contemplates that if we run out of bed space, as we quickly did right after Joe Biden took office because he shut down the Remain in Mexico program, litigated it, was ordered by a court to reinstate it, then he drew it and ran out the clock, and is to this day refusing to comply with that court order. His response is, oh, let's just let him go. But there is no reason why he has to do that. When you hear him speak, you will hear him speak in terms that will lead you to think that all of this is the inevitable, inexorable result of federal law that leaves him no choice but to unleash 10 million illegal immigrants on the American people. Now, this is his choice. He has chosen to do this. This was willful. Remember what was asked to his Homeland Security Secretary around about the time Joe Biden took office. I think it may have been even before Secretary Mayorkas was confirmed by the Senate, somewhere in that time frame. Somebody asked him, what would you say to those traveling up through these caravans? And he could have, I wish he would have, said something like, don't come, follow our laws to do that, apply for asylum outside the United States, go to a U.S. embassy, figure out what your options are, but don't just walk up here and enter in violation of our laws. No, he didn't say that. He instead said, it may take us a few weeks to become fully prepared to accept you. During that time, they had a lot to do, like shutting down the Remain in Mexico program, which had previously been negotiated to require people who enter by land without documentation at our southern border, presenting themselves as asylum applicants, to remain in Mexico during the pendency of their asylum applications. To this day, President Biden could and should Remain in Mexico program. He could also direct his Homeland Security Secretary, reminding him of the may-shall distinction, that this is only a may grant of authority and not a shall grant of a duty. That the answer, when you're overwhelmed, when you don't have enough bed space, when you don't have enough immigration judges to adjudicate these things, the answer is to shut the thing down. Stop taking them in. Stop paying for their plane ticket, moving them to the interior. Think about how twisted this is. If any of you traveled outside the United States within the last few years, you know how critical that passport is. If you lose the passport while you're outside the country, happens all the time, hear from constituents all the time. You're not getting back in easily. It's going to be a long slog. You're going to have to figure out a way to get a passport granted, or it's going to be tough to get back in the United States. These guys are not U.S. citizens. They've never paid U.S. taxes. They have no claim to this as their homeland. They're allowed in. We don't know who they are, but in some cases we do. You know, it's nothing short of terrifying that during this administration, 279 known terrorists have been admitted into this country, along with the 10 million illegal aliens who have come here. Now, the Biden administration will brag as if it were a feat of great accomplishment that they've deported 5,993 illegal immigrants entering this country unlawfully during their time in office. Sounds really impressive until you do the math, and you realize that they've released 99.7% of everyone coming into this country illegally. Don't tell me this is for want of federal legislation. This is for want of an utter, defiant, lawless refusal to enforce our border. Finally, do not fall for the mistake that this is somehow wrong. This is somehow xenophobic and intolerant not to allow anyone who wants to come into this country, or that it's discriminatory against the ethnicities of those who might be coming. It has nothing to do with it. I lived and worked among the poorest of the poor on the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Texas, in the McAllen, Texas area, 30 years ago. Even then, long before there were these huge waves of uncontrolled illegal immigration, I lived and worked among the poorest of the poor, many of them recent immigrants themselves, some documented, some not. No one fears uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration more than the poorest of the poor, recent immigrants themselves, documented or not, living on or near the U.S. border. It is their homes, it is their neighborhoods, it is their children's schools, it is their jobs that are most put at risk by this. This is wrong. Look, we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. We can be both. I hope and demand that we always will be. And to that end, I tell President Biden, secure the border or shut it down. We're not going to continue to fund your government as if nothing had changed when we've got this crisis unfolding on monumental proportions. So whether it's all of government or just the White House toilet paper budget, I don't know. But there have to be consequences for him doing this. We hold the power of the purse. We can do that. Somos una nación de inmigrantes. Somos también una nación de leyes. Podemos y debemos ser los dos.